Thank you all for joining in today. The topic of the webinar, of course, is what are and why life plans. And what you'll notice is that we have produced what we call the client-centered life planning process map. And what we're going to do today is refer to it. You'll notice on the left that we have summarized the conventional six-step financial planning process: engagement, discovery, analysis, and so on. And then over on the far right, we have the Vision Systems life planning process. So what we want to do is go through the standard six-step process first and talk about the flow of it, what's done, and where there are some very noticeable issues. The thing that I most want to emphasize is that I recall when doing the CFP course virtually 30 years ago, that the six-step process was, of course, taught at that time. But we have to put all of this in perspective. Back then, there were very few financial planning tools. Most people that did plans invented their own spreadsheets. So the point is that the technology of the day was very crude. And really, it was the technology that dictated the six-step process. We had to create plans for clients. So today, of course, technology has advanced hugely, and we can do things in ways that are a lot more engaging and client-friendly. But to put all of that in perspective, let's first talk about some of these key points in the standard financial planning process. The first thing I want to talk about is engagement, and wherever you may put this, generally speaking, we start the planning process by giving people questionnaires. The problem with this, of course, is that none of us like to complete questionnaires. And then there's another major issue, which is to the degree that planning software is robust, meaning that it can model many different things, a planning questionnaire, which is standardized, has to include all those things that the software can model. I've seen questionnaires that are up to 50 pages long. So clearly, if we put a 50-page questionnaire in somebody's lap, we're going to get a lot of resistance to begin. Now, part of all of this is based on one of our key principles, which is simply to say that in a plan, we have to be able to accurately capture people's wants in life and their current financial circumstances. So, for example, if somebody has stock options at work or an RDSP for a child, and those aren't included in a plan, then clients will look at the plan as being incomplete and therefore inaccurate, and they won't embrace it. And it doesn't matter if we've even missed something which is very minor, clients will catch that and then project that inaccuracy on the rest of the plan. So the issue with putting questionnaires at the beginning of the process is simply that nobody likes to complete them. And if the questionnaires are thorough, they're long, and right away we turn people off. The next thing I want to talk about, and let me enlarge this a little so that you can see it more clearly, is the discovery process. So really what we're talking about here is having a conversation with people about their goals in life. And we know what happens. We sit down with clients, we say, we're going to talk goals today. You know, what are they? And I would suggest you'd be very lucky if you got a half a dozen from people. Only those things that they've thought about as they're coming to the meeting, things that are top of mind, maybe educating children or whatever. So what advisors do is they develop a list of questions, and I'm going to refer to that as a script. So we get what we get from clients, and then we sit down and we start to go through a series of questions asking them, have you thought about vacations? What have you got in mind? What about this? What about that? So one of the problems with that kind of goals conversation is that the responses we'll get from people are pretty much limited to the questions that we ask. And this comes to a very important point that we'll talk about a little bit more later when we look at life planning. A bit technical, but the way our brains work is that anything that we've thought about in the past is stored in our brain as what's called a neural firing pattern. And necessarily the neurons are dormant unless they're activated. If they weren't dormant, all of our past thoughts would be active in our brains at once, and of course that would be total chaos. So what happens is we sit down, we ask people questions, but there certainly could be things that they've thought about in the past that simply don't come to mind for them. And if we miss those things, then we may have missed a major part of their goals in life. And I just want to illustrate that by going to VisionWorks and looking at vehicles. So in a goals conversation, we might say to people, what vehicles do you drive? When do you want to replace them or whatever? But I doubt very much that we would go through a whole array of questions saying, do you drive cars, vans, sport utilities, sports cars, trucks, etc.? And it may very well be that your client is thinking of a motorhome in retirement. And clearly, if we don't ask that question, then there's a good possibility that including the purchase of a motorhome in the plan may be neglected. The other issue that just want to mention is that when we have that goals conversation, it's actually very tedious. We have to ask a question, the client has to hear it, they have to interpret it, they have to formulate an answer, they have to speak the answer, we have to hear it. Often we'll repeat what they've said, am I clear? Is this what you mean? And then we write it down. So that whole process, question after question after question, is pretty tedious for people. The next thing that I want to look at is this whole concept of analysis. So what happens is we gather data from clients, we have a goals interview, we load the software with all of the information, and then we sit in front of the software and we begin to crunch the numbers and devise the plan. And necessarily, because we're creating a plan for the client, the plan has to focus on financial planning tactics, tax tactics, portfolio optimization, those sorts of things, to the neglect of examining lifestyle expenses, which are in after-tax dollars. And the reason, of course, that we can't examine them is that we can't make values-based judgments for people on possible changes to their lifestyle expenses. So plans necessarily have to focus on financial planning tactics. So we create the plan, we meet with clients, and we present the plan. And inevitably what happens is that clients will look at the output. It will either be showing a very good financial forecast, in which case they might say, could we spend more on vacations? It might be showing a shortfall, in which case they might say, well, what if we bought cars less often, spent less for them? So what ends up happening is we present the output, we have a conversation, clients pose questions, we make notes, we adjourn the meeting, go back to our office, key in the updated entries, reproduce the output, re-meet with a client, and represent. And in some cases, we've had the experience, of course, where that cycle of meet, discuss, redo, re-meet can go on actually for a few cycles, maybe even as much as a half a dozen, until everybody reaches the point of saying, well, good enough, even though the plan isn't exactly what the client wants to see. So again, this whole concept of creating a plan for the client, presenting, getting their feedback, reworking the plan is an extraordinarily time-consuming process. The other thing that I'll just touch on very briefly is this whole idea of ongoing engagement. And in this whole era of what we refer to as fee awareness, it's going to be extremely important that we produce a value add that clients feel is being significant for them, and they want to continually engage in the planning process. The issue with the six-step process is that while we may have meetings a few times, twice a year to review portfolio progress or changes, generally what we're taught in financial planning is that we should do an annual review with people. The issue, of course, is that life doesn't just change annually. Changes happen when changes happen. And the reason that the annual review is used, we should, of course, be doing that at least annually, is simply that this whole process of discussing goals, updating the data, presenting the output, getting client feedback, possibly having to revise the plan, it's close to as time-consuming and therefore costly to us as just doing the first plan or doing the original plan in the first place. So because of that, the tendency is to talk in terms of just doing a review once annually. So that's the background to the standard financial planning process. And what we want to do today is look at the life planning process and the differences that it represents. So first of all, in our approach, we talk about putting data gathering questionnaires in the middle of the process. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Instead, what we talk about, and this is optional, is doing the values exercise to begin the process. So you may recall, of course, that we have the values exercise. It's a series of questions. Clients respond to it. And then they can either bring it in with them, and what we can do is we can, all of these values start at the neutral position, but then we can go in and interactively put in the values during a conversation we have with people. And this is the approach that I spoke about in my book. Now, I want you to recall that that was published in 2005. So what we've done since then is we've produced that PDF questionnaire, which can be, the answers from which can be imported into VisionWorks. And one of the reasons that we've perhaps shifted our thinking on this is simply that over the last dozen years, compliance requirements have grown hugely. And so we've reached that point where time is at a far greater premium than ever before. So it's very effective to sit down, have the client complete the values exercise, bring it in so that they thought about their values, and then they just need to tell us how they rank the different values. I might mention also that when we're working with couples, both people should complete the values exercise. They can certainly have different values. And then what the software will do is it will calculate the aggregate of their two different rankings and come up with the core family values. So we can enter them interactively, or in the interest of saving time, they can complete the PDF questionnaire. We can then import the values. And when we meet with clients, what we can do is focus on the aggregate values and have them talk about those things that are most important. So the idea of starting with the values exercise is merely to convey that planning is about people, what's important to them. It's not about the numbers. By using questionnaires at the beginning of the process in the standard financial planning approach, we're really implying that planning is about numbers, but by using the values exercise to begin, we're implying or conveying to the client that planning is really about them and what's important to them. The next thing that we want to look at is this whole question of helping clients develop their vision of life, talk about their life goals. So rather than having just a conversation where we ask questions, what we're talking about, of course, is using the software interactively with clients to help them develop their vision of life. And this, of course, comes back to what we talked about earlier, which is the whole idea that our thoughts are stored in our brain and we need to activate them. And one of the most effective ways of activating them is by putting up something that's visual. Our eyes work very fast, so if we talk vehicles, clients will look over the array of choices, say, put in a sport utility, that's what we drive, and oh, look, a motorhome. Yes, we've talked about a motorhome in retirement. So this approach is not only very effective in drawing out all of people's wants, but it's also very fast and actually far less tedious, far easier on people than the standard ask, interpret, reply approach to planning. Now, what I want to do is I want to talk about developing this set of wants with people. And to this point, I've actually been using the financial planning interface. And the distinction for it is simply that when we create an entry, let's create a motorhome, what we're also able to do is go in and quantify the entry. So when we talk financial planning, we're sitting in front of the computer, we're creating entries based on our questionnaire, our goals conversation, and what we want to do is create the entry and right away we want to quantify it. There's a very different flow, though, in the life planning approach. So I'm going to switch the interface style to life planning, and then I'll run through it with you. So we have the values exercise. It's the same. When we go to vision, I want you to notice that we're just looking at home, lifestyle, family, and career. Now, this is not the standard asset, liability, cash flow organization. This is a life-oriented organization. The reason we put homes first is that everybody has to live somewhere, even if it's a rented home. Everybody has a lifestyle. People may or may not have family, and people may or may not have a career. Somebody may already be retired. So the concept is simply to go through and say to people, let's talk about the things you have and do now and would like to have and do in the future. So perhaps we've added their home, maybe we've added something that they would want to do around the home, perhaps a kitchen renovation. And then the client says, and one day we'd like to buy a Sunbelt home. So we just drag and drop it onto the tree view. Now, here's the key distinction. I want you to notice, unlike financial planning where we can create an entry and immediately quantify it, we're working on our own in front of the computer. In life planning, we can't quantify the entries. We simply are creating them. And the reason for this is that we have to understand the whole concept of right brain and left brain thinking. So right brain thinking is predominantly conceptual. We're imagining the future. Left brain thinking is numbers, when, how much, and so on. So if we went in, asked clients to identify the things they want to have and do, create an entry, very right brain, and then immediately quantify it, now we're switching them to left brain. So as we go through, we would be going right brain, left brain, right brain, left brain, right brain, left brain. And it literally tires the brain. So what we want to do in life planning is simply go through all the possibilities and have a very conceptual, high-level conversation that paints their pictures of life, the wants that they have. What we can do next is use the same approach to identify the things that they have they have now from a financial point of view. So I've got a TFSA, or if we go down to other, I've got a couple of rental properties, or I've got a few RRSPs, or whatever it may be. And this is very easy to do, only takes a few minutes. Now, one of the things we also know about planning and data gathering is that sometimes clients withhold information. They're not willing to divulge everything, especially if they're new clients. So what happens in this approach is that clients get into a rhythm on the vision page of identifying the different things that they would like to have or that have and do now in life and would like to have and do in the future. So when we switch to the financials and we want to gather the financial information, they're in that rhythm and they're just more inclined to say, oh yes, I have 2 RRSPs. So once we've put in the vision entries and the financial entries, we go to details. And one of the things that we do is we make a distinction between what we call a vision entry, buy a motor home, renovate the kitchen, and what we refer to as hard data entries. So if we just go to the data tab for a moment and we look at our Sunbelt home, the hard data entries are marked in these circles, red circles, property taxes, operating expenses, and so on. These things are very boring to talk about, and for the most part, clients don't know what they spend on them. So asking them to quantify that kind of information conversationally just is not very effective. On the other hand, when we talk in terms of vision entries are what I'm going to call made up. They're simply people's preferences. So what we can do is to complete this first meeting, what are your values, what's your vision, what's your financial starting point, we can then quantify the vision entries. And this would be something like, well, when do you want to buy the motor home? Oh, well, we want to buy it when we retire. So we're talking in 2030. And what do you think you'll spend on it? Well, you know, given what we've seen, we'll spend $125,000. So we can go through relatively easily, quantify the vision entries with people. There's another reason why we want to quantify them with clients, and that's because vision entries can change over time. So if we're simply loading data, what do you spend on winter vacations, and we don't actually talk with people about what they've got in mind, the underlying assumption is, well, we spend $5,000, we'll spend it forever, and it's inflation adjusted. So what we want to be able to do with any of these types of entries that continue over time is to ask clients, how might they change? So in this particular case, we spend $5,000 on vacations now. We have a limited amount of time we're working, excuse me. But when we retire, and I just need to left click to put in a change point, what we want to do is we want to spend $10,000 on vacations. We'll have more time. But will we be doing that when we're 85 or 90? No, of course not. We plan to do that for 10 years or 15 years, whatever the case might be, drop it back to $5,000 for another 5 years, and then we'll end it at that point. So by quantifying vision entries interactively with clients, we're able to catch how things might change over time. So what ends up happening? Well, we still need to gather that hard data. So what you'll find when you go to the data tab is that we can print questions. And what happens is that anything that has been quantified conversationally with people automatically is not populating the questionnaire. So we can see nothing about buying the Sunbelt home. We quantified it, but we can see things about, you know, property taxes or operating expenses. So the concept here is very simple. Even though software is extremely robust and we can model things like rental properties and stock options and RDSPs and whatever else may be involved. Only questions around those things appear on the questionnaire. The questionnaire is customized for the client. So we're not giving clients a long questionnaire, even though the software is highly robust. One other thing that I'll just point out is that these are computer-generated questionnaires and not, perhaps the prettiest. So if you select export and save as, you're able to save the questionnaire as what's called an RTF file. And when you save it as an RTF file, you can then open it in Word and you can customize it, put in your logo, use colors, maybe get rid of some of the questions that you don't really feel are all that appropriate. So you can really polish it, and that only takes a few minutes to do. There's one other very important consideration when we work interactively with clients and around questionnaires, and that's the motivation for clients to complete them. So when they're at the beginning of the process, clients don't have a motivation. It's literally, my advisor has sent me a questionnaire and wants me to complete it so I can enter the financial planning process. When we move questionnaires, though, to the middle of the process, what happens is we actually motivate clients to complete them. They've talked about their vision of life. They've got that very clear picture in their mind. And their question is, are we acting effectively to achieve this vision? And the only way they're going to find out is to provide us with the hard data we require so that we can get it loaded into the software, then come to the next meeting and have a look at the output. So the flow of the process then is we'll engage clients through the values exercise, convey that planning is about them, not the numbers. We'll interactively help them build their vision of life. We'll stimulate their thoughts a lot more, and it's actually a much smoother thing to do than asking and answering questions. We'll generate a hard data questionnaire that clients will complete, return to us, so we can get the hard data loaded in. And then we'll have our next meeting with clients where we'll look at the output. And as we've discussed in the past, we'll help explain which of the 5 themes they fall into. And we may not use explicit terms such as house rich and cash poor, but we'll explain which of the themes, what their core issue is, and then what we'll do is we'll apply the 3 C's in order to resolve any gaps they have. So let's have a look now at the output for this particular plan. And what we'll see, of course, is that the net worth projection looks fine. But as we've discussed in the past, this is largely due to the value of their house, cottage, and eventually Sunbelt home. And when we look at income assets, they're going to make it, but it's relatively thin in inflated dollars. And if we have a look, it's very thin in today's dollars, just $140,000 excess, which they've run down from over $1.5 million. So remember that in our software, you can do unlimited what-if scenarios. My recommendation before this meeting where we're looking at output is that you do create a new solution. All you need to do is click the copy button, and that you do one financial planning tactic, and that's apply tax reduction techniques. I don't know anyone who wouldn't want to lower their taxes. So I think this is something that applies virtually to all plans. We have the ability then to go in and apply tax reduction tactics. And then when we meet with clients, we can show them, here's the financial forecast. I've applied tax reduction tactics. We anticipate you'll save X number of dollars in taxes. And right away, I think you're showing your value to clients. But at this point, once they understand what their financial projection is, really what will happen is the clients will then want to talk about, oh, well, what if we did this? What if we did that? And of course, the whole point of working interactively is that we want to avoid that cycle of meet, discuss, make notes about adjustments, make the adjustments, re-meet, and so on. We want to be able to do everything with the client conversationally. So just as a simple example, we see that this is close to the house rich, cash poor projection. It's very borderline. So one of the things a client might say is, well, we'll be down south as much as possible in the Sunbelt home. We have the cottage. We really don't need the big house as well. So what we might do is we might downsize our home in retirement and just have a pied-à-terre, just a condo in the city. So we can go in with them and, of course, sell the house. And I'm just going to make this the beginning of June 2030. Sorry, the beginning of June 2030. We can sell the house. Now you'll notice that we don't have an expensive house modeled here. And when we sell the house, all the money will go into the portfolio. So now we need to go and buy the condo. And I'm going to do this one day later because we want to have, we don't want to have two principal residences at once. So I'm going to make it one day later, and if the house was $500,000 in today's dollars, we'll just make the condo $300,000 in today's dollars. And then once we've done that, we can have a look at the financial forecast and we can see the impact. And of course, what you'll see is the capital takeout makes a big difference, but also that capital takeout is going to be invested over time. And as a result, we're earning returns on it, and we've made a substantial difference in the overall forecast. So keeping in mind that we identify the client's core issue, we then apply tax reduction tactics, and then we're able to have a conversation and work interactively with clients to help them see what the impact is on different things. So having done this, it may very well be that the client says, and I'm going to, I know we have the Sunbelt home, but I'm still going to use that winter vacation approach. The client may very well say, well, that really makes a big difference. So what if we spent more on winter vacations? So we can then make the adjustment and we will see what the overall impact is on the plan. So the point that I want to make is that, and we can see it reduces things, but still leaves plenty in the kitty for the clients. So the point that I want to make is that all planning is about learning and decision-making. And the approach that has always been taken, and I want to stress this word, is that the learning medium has always been the written plan. What we're suggesting is that the learning medium should be an interactive conversation with clients. When I first learned about this concept, which was way back in 1990, a good friend of mine, somewhat of a mentor in my life, and a man who was very well connected, I was explaining to him what I wanted to do, and he gave me the names of some people that he thought I should speak with. One of whom was a man named Don Brundage, and at the time he was a professor at OISE, the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education. Brundage had written a book that was published in 70 countries on adult learning principles. So he was absolutely one of the world-class authorities on how we learn as adults. And what Brundage said when I explained to him what I was up to was that planning needed to be done interactively with clients. That as adults, we learn experientially. And the concept is, show the financial forecast, make a change so that the clients can see the impact of the change, and in effect compress time to give them an experiential learning opportunity. So this is really one of the key reasons for working interactively with clients, is that it's a much more effective approach for learning and decision making, which is really the core of what all planning is about. The other aspect of this is that when we work interactively, clients are able to reflect two things in their plan. One is their values, and one is what I'm going to call preferences, and we refer to that actually as attitudes. Their particular way of wanting to do things. So I want to give you an example of this. When I first started in all of this work, one of the things that I did was I went to about 90 of my stock brokerage clients from my days of being a broker, and I gradually took them through a planning process that we were evolving over time. One occasion I met with a doctor, and he had about $250,000 in a savings account, and at the time earning, I think, about around 3%. Meanwhile, he had been quite ill for a long time. He'd returned to work, but he'd been ill for a long time, and he'd run up a personal line of credit of about $150,000, which I think was costing him something like 9%. So looking at it from a planning tactic point of view, the interest was after-tax dollars that he was paying on the line of credit. The interest he was earning, of course, was pre-tax dollars. So I did a scenario and said, I'm going to recommend that you take some of the $250,000, pay off your line of credit, modeled it for him, showed it to him, and said, here's the difference, which, of course, over the remainder of his life represented quite a substantial amount. He looked at it and he said, I see the difference. However, I'm only comfortable when I have $250,000 of ready cash. That said, because there's a difference, what I'll do is I'll pay off $75,000 of the line of credit. I'll still have $175,000 in my bank account, and that's okay. So one of the key points is that the best plans are not the plans that are technically the best. They're actually the plans that suit clients, that suit their values and their preferences, their attitudes, so that they feel comfortable implementing the plans. The one last thing that I want to talk about is this whole concept of ongoing engagement. So let's go back and have a look at our process map. And what I'm going to suggest to you is there is no the plan. All there is for people is their wants at this point in time and their current financial circumstances. And the one thing that we know for certain is that things change. So we may very well do a plan, and then because we've stimulated clients thinking about the future, in 2 weeks or 2 months or a year and a half, they may call us and say, we're thinking about renovating the kitchen. So in the standard approach, the review is done once a year. What we're suggesting is we need to train clients to think in terms of calling us so that we can do what-if scenarios before they do something of any financial consequence. We can model it in a what-if scenario. We can help them understand the long-term implications so that they can make very informed decisions and feel very comfortable with those decisions. In the absence of doing that, I'm going to suggest that most people, however they arrive at a decision, whether it's a spontaneous decision, whether it's something that's very well considered, however they arrive at it, what they do is they spend an awful lot of time looking in the rear view mirror of life, worrying about the decisions that they've made, whether they were good or not, because they have no way of really understanding things. So what we need to do is take clients through the life planning process and then very much emphasize, before you go out and do something of any significance financially, let me know. We can do a webinar. I can bring up the software, readily model what you're thinking of doing. You can see what the implications are. And as a consequence, you can make a very informed decision. And in doing that, one of the things we're going to do is we're going to reduce financial stress in their lives. So in this whole era of fee awareness and bringing a value add to people, I want to suggest that helping them manage life proactively is a significant value add. And I'll go one step further and say that all of us have to manage life, but what we're really doing is we're opening the door for clients to master life. So we have this map available. If you would like to get a copy of it, please let us know and we can certainly provide you with one. But today we wanted to talk about what are and why life plans. So we've gone through the standard financial planning process. What are some of the drawbacks to it? And then we've looked at the life planning process, how things are reorganized, questionnaires in the middle, for example, and also the concept that ultimately planning interactively with clients is a significant improvement over creating plans for them.
When we create plans interactively with clients, we're no longer creating plans prescriptively. Our role is one of being a coach. We put clients into a learning environment, show them the impact of financial planning tactics, and make lifestyle changes that they suggest. The result is the clients feel they're building their plan for themselves. This leads to much greater buy-in. Not doing what they say they're going to do means breaking a promise to themselves, not to us. Ultimately, the plan is much more to their advantage. They have a plan that suits them, their values and personal preferences, so that they're happy to work the plan. To sum up, you can create simple retirement plans with VisionWorks. You can create financial plans for clients until you feel you're competent with VisionWorks. And then you can create life plans interactively with them. I'll make one more observation. When you work with clients and discuss their values, help them build their vision of life, they confide in you and you build a very deep relationship with them very quickly. And I would suggest in this new era of fee awareness, this is going to be something that's very important for us to do. I think the type of relationship, the depth of relationship that you build with clients is far better than spending the same amount of time taking them to lunch. A year from now, they probably won't remember the lunch, but they'll certainly remember the time you spent with them, helping them build their vision of life. Everything that we've discussed today is available on the website. If you open the VisionWorks menu and go to Life Planning Videos, you'll see a video on creating entries, the different approach that we take, the right brain, left brain approach, quantifying entries, doing the vision entries conversationally with people. You'll see a video on questionnaires, how to build those very brief customized questionnaires. And of course, you'll see the videos on the 3 C's and the 5 main planning themes. So I'd like to thank you again very much for your time today. We do have that planning process map, so if you'd like a copy, please give us a call. Thank you.